Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Toronto District School Board's Parents and Caregivers Virtual Conference 2021. My colleagues and I are glad to be back, and we thank you for taking the time this afternoon to learn with us. Special education practices based on principles of equity, inclusion, anti-oppression, and anti-racism has been designed to give you, the parent caregivers, the tools and strategies to support your family as you navigate special education processes together. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the lands that we are living on. The power and the potential of the land acknowledgement allows us to connect with the very rich history of this region and make it clear that there were First Peoples who lived here prior to Confederation, peoples who we now work in stewardship with to manage these lands with respect for Indigenous customs and ways. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Please take a moment to recognize the people, ancestral lands, communities, and traditional territories where you currently work and reside. Miigwech. My name is Natasha Suvan. I'm a special education inclusion consultant in the Toronto District School Board in Learning Center 1. I'm a beloved mother of a 5-year-old daughter, an educator, a traveler, and a sports enthusiast.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorraine Bell. I'm also a special education inclusion consultant with the TDSB. I'm a doting aunt to 2 beautiful girls, an educator, and I enjoy, among other things, cooking, singing, and laughing. Nice to be with you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mona Moftakar, Special Education Inclusion Consultant with TDSB LC1. I'm a parent of 3, equity-focused educator. I enjoy reading and quality family time with my family. In today's workshop, we'll be looking at the intersectionality of special education, anti-Black racism, and anti-oppression. We acknowledge that conversations involving race can become emotionally charged and uncomfortable at times. However, it's important for these discussions to happen as race impacts our schools, our students, and the work that we do as educators. Before we delve any further into our workshop, we will review the 4 agreements of courageous conversations, which will help us to create the conditions necessary for us to engage in our discussions today. Staying engaged is the first expectation that is important to creating a culture of open dialogue about race. So there's an expectation that we will all stay engaged in our learning and conversations about race rather than withdrawing when things get uncomfortable. The second agreement, experience discomfort, acknowledges that discomfort is unavoidable, especially in dialogues about race. It acknowledges that it is through dialogue, even when uncomfortable, that healing, growth, and change begin. The third agreement, speak your truth, recognizes that in any courageous conversation, it's important that we share our honest sentiments. When we speak our truth, we can begin our journey of learning, unlearning, and relearning. The last agreement, expect and accept non-closure, acknowledges that anti-racism work is not about quick solutions or something that simply gets checked off a list. Dismantling racism must be a regular, ongoing, and intentional process.
Parents and caregivers, welcome again to our session. Our discussion today will be centered around how a tiered approach to inclusion supports the different special education processes. And with each process, we'll share some things to think about and some guiding questions to support you as you engage in conversations about your child's progress. So our agenda today will include looking at the tiered approach to inclusion, navigating the individual learning profile, navigating the in-school team and school team support team processes, navigating the individual education plan process, talking about TDSB's new K-12 IEP strategy, looking at navigating the IPRC process. Please remain on mute throughout the presentation, and also feel free to put your questions in the chat as Natasha will moderate the chat and will address the questions at the end. So our goals for today include building capacity for all stakeholders to support the learning of all students in an inclusive learning environment, strengthening collaboration with you, parents and caregivers, so that you feel supported to engage effectively in the decision-making process, and also supporting you, parents and caregivers, to be and to continue being effective advocates for your children with special education needs. We know and value the partnerships with family and community, recognizing them as essential. And we also recognize that children are unique individuals who live and learn within families and communities. So we all reap the benefits when we encourage ongoing dialogue with families about your children's learning and development. The comment on this slide about families comes from our kindergarten curriculum, and it is true for all of our students. It says here that families are composed of individuals who are competent and capable, curious, and rich in experience. Families love their children and want the best for them. Families are the experts on their children. They're the first and most powerful influence on children's learning, development, health, and well-being. And we want to thank you for working in partnership with us as your child's first teacher. So Natasha, please help us to see, how does the special education process begin?
In the TDSB, we believe and know that all students can learn. The tiered approach to support inclusion are strategies used to support learners in the classroom. These strategies are tiered in 3 stages. Tier 1 at the bottom is for all, Tier 2 strategies is for some, and Tier 3 are for a few. In Tier 3 particularly, these students are typically those that are in our intensive support programs, also known as ISPs, and that have potentially been seen by the IPRC committee, which I will later discuss in this presentation. We encourage classroom teachers to ensure that strategies in Tier 1 and Tier 2 are implemented prior to a student being referred to an in-school support team meeting, which is also known as an IST meeting, or an SST meeting, which is also known as a school support team meeting, which Lorraine will discuss shortly. The tiered approach to support inclusion is located in the special education program, and the link is at the bottom of that slide. The ILP seen here is created and reviewed during consultation with the school-based teams called IST and SST. It is established to assist teachers in meeting a student's need. At the in-school support team meeting or the school support team meetings, a more comprehensive examination of a teacher's programming to address the student's needs are carried out and interventions are recommended. The nature, intensity, and duration of interventions are based on evidence recorded in the individual learning profile, which is seen here. As we continue to navigate the individual learning profile, taking this approach may also provide early identification of students who are at risk in numeracy, literacy, or some students that may have behavior and or social emotional concerns. Taking these measures ensures that all of the appropriate learning strategies, like I said before, Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategies, as well as equitable and inclusive practices, have been implemented appropriately. If you attend both the in-school support team meeting or the school support team meeting, a copy of the ILP will be provided for you to follow along in these meetings. Now, Mona, will you take us through some guided questions regarding the individual learning profile?
Thank you, Natasha. So as parents and caregivers, your input and voice matters throughout the special education process, starting with the ILP development, which, as Natasha already mentioned, is the individual learning profile for your child. Once you get a copy of your child's ILP, here are some things that you can look for. First, examine the ILP to determine if your child is presented in a holistic manner. As Natasha has just mentioned, the ILP provides information about your child's learning profile. So once you receive it, you are encouraged to review it in order to obtain specific information about your child's areas of strengths and needs and their current level of functioning in class in the areas of math, reading, and writing. While reviewing the ILP, look to see if your child is presented in a holistic way. Do you feel that the full scope of your child's skills and abilities have been captured? As we will discuss in greater detail in the next slide, IST and SST meetings, otherwise known as in-school team meetings and school support meetings, are opportunities for team consultation with a group of professionals. During these meetings, there is a discussion about the supports and strategies that are being used in the classroom by the teacher to support your child's learning. Therefore, it is important to ensure that a complete picture of both your child's needs and strengths are captured, as this will help guide the teacher's programming. Another thing you will note is that the ILP will use strength-based language to describe your child's learning profile. At the TDSB, we view all children as competent and capable of success. When we recognize children as competent and capable, we are more likely to deliver programs that build on their strengths and abilities. It is essential to view all children from an asset-based lens in order to give all of our students equitable access to success. And lastly, when you receive your child's ILP, you will want to review it to determine if it uses a strength-based approach. A good classroom program builds on students' strengths and abilities. The strategies that are recommended in the ILP should build on your child's strengths to develop a plan of action to support their needs. So for example, if your child struggles with writing, if they are tech savvy and have good oral speaking skills, then a good plan of action would be to provide your child with options and choices for demonstrating their knowledge in ways that do not strictly involve pencil and paper tasks. For example, instead of writing, your child can give an oral presentation, create a Google slide or video to demonstrate their learning. As your child's primary advocate, you can ask certain questions to gather more information about how your child will be supported in school. Here's a list of questions that you can ask to help guide your conversations with the school around your child's ILP. Do the plan of action and recommendations made in the ILP draw upon my child's individual strengths? So again, as mentioned in the previous slide, a good plan of action in the ILP will provide students with different ways to participate in their learning and to demonstrate that learning in a way that is responsive to their unique areas of strengths and needs. So as another example, if your child is a visual learner, then he or she will benefit from having visual supports in the classroom in order to support their learning. Another question you can ask is, how long will the strategies recommended in the ILP be implemented for in order to determine their effectiveness in supporting my child's areas of strength and needs? So when a student is brought forward to an IST or an SST, the school team will recommend strategies for supporting the student in the classroom. As good practice, the strategies recommended should be implemented for at least 6 weeks prior to accessing higher levels of support for your child. Once the strategies are implemented in the classroom, your child's progress in response to these strategies will be monitored and revisited at a team meeting again to discuss next steps. And lastly, you can ask your child's teacher what their current level of functioning is in math and language and how this is being assessed. As teachers, we're expected to assess our students, and the information that we gather through our classroom assessments helps us to identify our students' learning needs, guides our next steps in instruction, and allows us to make programming decisions. For students who are being flagged at an IST or an SST, this information is recorded in an ILP.
Thanks so much, Mona. So this chart outlines the process of a student being brought forward for discussion. Prior to the in-school team meeting, the IST, we would expect that the tiered approach to inclusion has been used and that teachers have tried various strategies to support the student and continue to have concerns. Then, just as at the bottom, an IST discussion would take place anchored in the individual learning profile, which were the 2 sheets that Natasha presented earlier. And there, the in-school team would share strengths and next steps, areas for growth. When teachers have exhausted the recommendations from the IST, then we would proceed to an SST, the school support team meeting. All students will need to be reviewed at an IST before a referral would be made to an SST. So before an IST, as noted, the teacher would already have communicated their concerns to yourselves, parents and caregivers, and consulted with you about the child's perceived areas of growth and the kinds of instructional interventions that are being used. The IST team, it can be viewed as sort of a meeting of the minds, where strategies are provided for the educator through close consultation with their school-based colleagues. So while your attendance is encouraged at the IST, it's not mandatory. As Natasha noted, the individual learning profile would be provided to you with the recommendations that were made at the IST for your approval, comment, further conversation. The SST is a tier 3 level of support, and that meeting provides strategies that are specific to your child. And this is why your participation is particularly encouraged. The role of the school support team is to review and discuss strategies that teachers have been using to address students' areas for growth, to work collaboratively to develop, monitor, and evaluate action plans and strategies to help the student. This team also offers additional knowledge by including psychologists, social workers, attendance counselors, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, yourselves, and students who are over the age of 16. A referral to the Identification, Placement, and Review Committee, also known as the IPRC, that referral also comes through and a recommendation from this level of meeting from the SST. You'll hear more about that later in our presentation. Mona, could you please take us through some additional thoughts and guiding questions around the IST and SST processes?
Thank you, Lorraine. As parents and guardians, your voices and your perspectives are vital throughout the IST and SST process. So you are really encouraged to contribute to the discussions about your child, as parent voice is always welcome and your input is always valued. As parents and guardians, you offer invaluable insight on your children's development, strengths, needs, and interests. At the TDSB, we strive to create a culture of shared responsibility with our families so that we can collectively support the learning of all students. As you navigate through the IST and SST process, here are some things that you can consider. Your child will be presented as a competent and capable learner, and their brilliance recognized and presented. Again, at the TDSB, we recognize that all of our students are competent and capable of success. Your children are holistic individuals with a multitude of strengths and areas of growth. It is important that when your child is being presented at a team discussion, their brilliance is recognized and presented. If there's any belief that there is an underestimation of your child's academic capabilities, this can be addressed in your discussions at an IST or SST meeting. If a bias about your child is suspected, you are encouraged to address it with the school team. It is well known that everyone has unconscious bias. These implicit biases are linked to the inequitable outcomes we are seeing in the board, as our Black and Indigenous students are overrepresented in special education programs and IEPs. If a bias is suspected about your child, then it's important that this be interrupted and addressed. The TDSB is very committed to providing equitable access to learning opportunities for all students. Before any referral to an IST or SST is started, it is expected that educators work closely with their principals to confront and challenge any assumptions or unconscious biases they may have when considering an IST or SST referral. And as Lorraine mentioned, when possible, attend school meetings involve your child. Your active involvement and participation is vital to your child's success. Again, if you cannot attend an IST or an SST meeting, you can request a copy of the ILP so that you are kept informed about the plan of action for your child. Here's a list of questions you can ask as you navigate through the IST and SST process at your child's school. Was my child given an opportunity to access and demonstrate their learning in a way that best suits their area of strength? What classroom strategies are being used to support my child's needs? Is the IEP needed for my child to access the curriculum expectations? What accommodations can be supported in the classroom that do not require an IEP? How is the identity of my child being leveraged and centered in the classroom program? As mentioned before, in a diverse classroom, there's no single method that can reach all learners. Multiple pathways to achieving goals are needed. So it's important for educators to provide a range of instructional strategies, resources, learning tasks, and assessment tools in order to meet the different needs, strengths, and learning styles of all students in the class. Also, there are many accommodations that can be supported in the classroom that do not require an IEP. The IST/SST decision to place a student on an IEP or access higher levels of support is based on the learning conditions created by the teacher to set the student up for success, and based on the teacher's ongoing assessment and evaluation of the student. As mentioned earlier in our workshop, supports and interventions at the TDSB are tiered. If a student is not responding effectively to classroom-based interventions and Tier 1 and Tier 2 tasks, then they can be considered for an IEP at that point or referred to an SST. And lastly, at the TDSB, teachers strive to integrate the voices, identities, abilities, and lived experiences of their students into the curriculum. We know that students are far more successful when they are engaged in their learning. As such, when implementing effective classroom learning conditions, educators must consider how the identities of their students and lived experiences are being leveraged to enhance their learning. When educators deliver a program that builds on their students' identities and experiences, they make the curriculum relevant and accessible to all students.
Thank you, Mona. So the IST and SST processes often shine a light into the need for an IEP. The decision would be based, as noted, on sufficient data that was provided to determine that the child's educational and socio-emotional areas of growth would require an IEP. Equity, anti-oppression, anti-racism, and inclusion discussions must occur before any IEP is created. Some questions we discuss include, who is the student being considered and why? What accommodations can be supported in the classroom that do not require an IEP? What support can the teacher be offered to better assist in programming? Ultimately, is the IEP necessary for the student to access the curriculum? These questions promote an intentionality around IEP development. So as our board continues to focus its efforts on racialized students who are overrepresented on IEPs and in intensive support programs, there's a need to confront and disrupt unconscious bias within our schools. And this conversation of intentionality is one way that we strive to support inclusion and to combat the overrepresentation of racialized students in special education. All that being said, we want to acknowledge that any student who may need to access an IEP can at any time. The information here comes from the Ministry of Education document, and it outlines in sufficient detail the different aspects of the IEP. Rather than read it, we can just look at what the main takeaways are. And some of them are that it's written in collaboration with you, the parent caregiver. It's based on assessment. It drives the instruction. It can and should be updated. And it is a fluid working document. The IEP serves as an accountability tool for all parties involved all parties that are involved in helping the student meet their IEP goals and expectations. All voices matter. What the IEP does not do is outline all lesson plans, nor will it itemize every detail of your child's education. The IEP is also not meant to monitor teacher effectiveness. And you'll notice the image, the graphic on the right is one side of TDSB's IEP information pamphlet for parents. And the link will be included in a later slide for your convenience. So in response to the current data and to address the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous students in special education programs, we're directing our attention at interrupting the process by which IEPs are generated for our early learners in kindergarten and grade 1. The TDSB has implemented the kindergarten to grade 1 IEP strategy, which means that before any child in SK, JK, or grade 1 is placed on an IEP, the principal will consult with their superintendent of education to review assessments, learning conditions, attitudinal biases or barriers, and to explore alternatives before reaching an agreement to proceed. These areas of consideration lead us to these questions of intentionality. Why an IEP? Why this child? Why at this time? These conversations are also planned for this year to extend to include IEPs for students across all grades, 2 to 12 included. So the impact of TDSB's new K-12 IEP strategy, this plan of action is trying to target implicit racial bias in our system striving to eliminate inequitable outcomes for students with or without disabilities, striving to disrupt oppressive practices, and to improve and expand student future pathways. And so, as noted before, even with all of this initiative, there are students who will need to access an IEP, and that right will never be removed, but this work needs to be done. Natasha?
The Individual Education Plan, also abbreviated as the IEP, as Lorraine spoke about previously, is to be created within the first 30 days of the start of a special education program. Before the IEP can be written, the parent consultation letter is sent home. Principals are legally required to ensure that parents are consulted in the development of the IEP. Consultation with parents can provide an invaluable perspective on their child's personality, development, and learning. Open communication and cooperation between home and school will also ensure that parents, caregivers, and the school have similar expectations with respect to the student's special education program and services. An important part of this process is parent and student voice, as Mona has mentioned many times in this presentation. The parent consultation form displayed here is sent home every year. Since this form is a valuable tool, it is a great idea to fill it out with your child's input. Mona?
Okay, so as we have mentioned several times, all voices matter throughout the special education process, and parents and guardians are really important members of our IEP team. Here are some ways that you can bring in your voice in conversations around IEP development for your child. So again, during the parent consultation phase of the IEP development, ensure that your insights and your input about your child are given due consideration. Determine the justification for the development of an IEP. In the TDSB, just to reiterate what's already been said, anti-oppression, anti-racism, and inclusion discussions must occur before any IEP is created. In general, IEPs are developed for the following reasons. Students who have been identified by an Identification, Placement, and Review Committee, IPRC, must have an IEP completed within 30 school days of placement in a special education program. An IEP can also be developed for students who have not been formally identified, and this happens when the principal, in consultation with members of the in-school team meeting, IST, or school support team meeting, the SST, determines that a child regularly requires accommodations in the classroom for instructional or assessment purposes, and/or will be assessed on the basis of modified expectations. So basically, if your child is having difficulty meeting the grade level expectations, your child may be placed on an IEP with modifications. Modifications are required when the classroom accommodations being utilized are not enough to support a student's specific learning needs. And again, as mentioned by Lorraine earlier, the IEP is a working document that must be reviewed and updated as necessary at least once in every reporting period. So you are encouraged to be, make sure you are kept informed about the changes and updates made to your child's IEP. And lastly, continue to communicate with your child's classroom teacher and openly question the long-term impact of modified IEPs on your child's educational pathway. Modifications, again, are changes made to the grade level expectations for a subject or course. Such changes involve either selecting expectations from a different grade level or changing the number and/or complexity of grade level expectations. IEP modifications can impact on student educational pathways, so that it's really, really important that there be a clear communication between parents and guardians and school staff about their impact. So for example, modifications in secondary grades can impact on credit attainment. It is important for you as parents and guardians that you understand the nature of IEPs, as they may impact on your child's future program. At the TDSB, one of our goals is to ensure that all students have equitable access to success. We want to increase all of our students' opportunities to access all pathways by ensuring that anti-oppressive, anti-racist, and inclusive practices are implemented. Here's a list of questions that you can ask when an IEP is being considered for your child. What classroom interventions and strategies have been used to support my child in order to mitigate the need for an IEP? What evidence is there that my child is not producing classwork that is at grade level? How will my child's progress be assessed and measured in relation to the IEP? What is the impact of this IEP on my child's educational pathway? And how can I support the goals outlined in my child's IEP? In planning an IEP for a student with special education needs, the teacher, with the support of the IST and SST, begin by considering the student's strengths and areas of growth, as well as their instructional level, so the grade level that they're currently working at. A student's instructional level is determined by the teacher's educational assessment data and takes into account other professional assessment information if such data is available for your child. In light of this assessment information, the teacher considers a starting point for the IEP and the curriculum expectations that are appropriate for the student's instructional level. In consultation with the IST and SST, the teacher determines whether the student will require an IEP at all, or whether they require an IEP with accommodations only, or an IEP with both modifications and accommodations. Again, when the classroom supports and accommodations being utilized are not enough to support a student's specific learning needs, that is when modifications will be considered for your child. Finally, assessment for students with special education needs is an ongoing and continuous process. The IEP provides a framework for communicating to parents and guardians the information about the student's progress on both the progress report and the provincial report card.
The IPRC can be an overwhelming process for parent and caregivers. Let's take a closer look at this process using the IPRC pamphlet for families. So the Identification Placement Review Committee is the formal process for a student to be determined as an exceptional pupil. So that's a student, again, that has special needs. And if so, an appropriate program setting will also be determined at this meeting. For example, the outcome of a meeting could mean that a student returns to regular class or returns to regular class with resource, or they might be returning or starting a special education program with either a full-time or part-time setting. A key thing to remember, only resident students enrolled in and already attending a TDSB school are eligible for consideration to be reviewed by a TDSB IPRC committee. An IEP is required to engage in the IPRC process as well. IPRC meetings. So the purpose of the IPRC meeting is to understand the student's learning strengths. And we also encourage parents and students over the age of 16 to attend these meetings and take part in the discussion. As Mona has said many times over in this presentation, your voice matters. Annual reviews are IPRCs that are school-based and take place yearly for students with special needs to determine if the support is still needed. So an example would be if your child is starting a grade 1 special education program, the program would usually end in grade 3. Every year in grade 1, at the end of grade 1, they will have an annual review. When they're in grade 2, they may have the option to waive the review if they did it the year before, but in grade 3, they will definitely have a review because the program is ending and we will have to determine if they would need to consider starting a program for grade 4, 5, and 6. Appeals. Now, sometimes at IPRCs, parents don't always agree with the decision that's being made. So if there are IPRC concerns that you feel need to be resolved, contact your school principal first, have a discussion. If that doesn't work, to begin a formal appeal, please see the Guide to Special Education for Parents, which I will discuss in further detail on the resources page.
So for some of our families, the IPRC process will be new to you, and it's important to take that time to learn about it. And school staff, as well as special education inclusion consultants, are there to help you with understanding the process. So here are some things you can ask yourself as you navigate through the IPRC process. Have I felt supported throughout this process? Do I feel that my voice, identity, culture, concerns, and input have been acknowledged and validated? Do I feel that I fully understand all documentation, placement options, and pathways that the IPRC may lead to? Again, throughout the IPRC process, principals, school staff, and special education inclusion consultants will work with you, our families, to ensure that you feel supported throughout this process. Principals are to acknowledge and validate parent and guardian voice, identity, culture, and any concerns prior to attending the IPRC. As parents and guardians, you should fully understand all documentation, placement options, and pathways that the IPRC may lead to. And please do not hesitate to ask for clarification about anything that is not entirely clear to you. Here are some guiding questions you can consider during the IPRC process. How will an ISP placement, an intensive support placement, impact on my child's educational pathway? How can my child's needs be supported in a regular classroom setting? If an ISP class placement is decided upon for my child, what efforts will be made to integrate and include my child in regular class programs and activities? And how often will my child's exceptionality and placement be reviewed? So at the IPRC, as Natasha mentioned, the student's cognitive profile and their particular areas of strengths and growth will be discussed. In view of this information and with your input, the IPRC will consider the most appropriate placement for your child, which again could mean regular class or special education class. Ultimately, you are in the driver's seat, so the type of placement your child receives will be decided on an individual basis depending on both your preference and your child's unique learning profile. It is important to mention that in most cases, special education class placements are expected to be transitional in nature and of limited duration. So successful reintegration into the regular program is always the potential goal. Throughout a full-time placement, efforts are made to increasingly integrate the student in the regular school program and activities. View of children, families, and educators. When we hold the view of children, families, and educators as being competent and capable, there are many benefits to this. So the kindergarten program is based on this belief that all children, families, and educators are competent and capable. And as Lorraine had mentioned previously, at the TDSB, this belief is extended and applied across all grades, starting from kindergarten to grade 12. When we adopt this asset-based view of children, families, and educators, this leads to better educational outcomes for all students. When we view our families as valued partners, they are seen as valuable contributors to their children's learning and are engaged as partners in meaningful ways. When we view our students with an asset-based lens, deficit thinking is rejected, and we create a culture of high expectations for all of our students. This view leads to improved academic outcomes for all students and strengthens homeschool connections.
All right, we have listed a set of resources for you that we have used to prepare today's presentation. And I'd like to take a closer look at three resources in particular. Lorraine, let's start with SEAC, the Special Education Advisory Committee. So the Special Education Advisory Committee makes recommendations to the board with respect to any matter affecting the establishment, development, and delivery of special education programs and services for exceptional students of the board. SEAC also participates in the board's annual review of the special education plan. So seen here, this is the website. And again, these links are all provided in our presentation, which everyone attending this conference will be able to access, I guess, as of Monday. So on the right-hand side of the screen, just webcasting meetings. So like I said, every month they meet. When it was in person, it was at 5050 Yonge Street, but now they are virtual. So the next meeting looks to be November 8th, perfect. And just below here, if you've missed a meeting, the agenda, the meeting minutes are also posted on the board website. Okay, so this is very good to have. So once you have a chance to access our presentation, it's good to bookmark it. Perfect. The next resource that I wanted to take a look at is the Parent Guide to Special Education. So I spoke about this in my readings on the IPRC committee. So the purpose of this guide is to provide you with information regarding the IPRC process and how students are identified as pupils with an exceptional placement, as well as if you need to appeal a decision. So at the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, you will see the exact strategies and ways that you're able to appeal a decision if and when that happens to you, if that happens, if you feel the need to do so. Everything is in this guide. And again, this is also, this will be available for you to access. The last resource that we believe is very helpful to our families is the special education acronyms. So the special education acronyms is a list of all the acronyms educators use in special education. We know that sometimes we try our best in IST and SST meetings to use the full names of everything. However, sometimes people forget, and we also want to make sure that parents understand, caregivers understand, families understand exactly what we're talking about. So this is located in section G of the special education plan. All of the acronyms that we use, so IPRC, IST, IEP, all of these different things that we may say and we try our best, but it's always a good tool for you to have just in case something is written and you don't understand, you can always access this. Moving to our final thought, we know that every parent, caregiver wants the best for their child. We as educators know and believe that all students can learn. We encourage and value every contribution that our families share to be better. And the ones that the fact that they look towards their loved ones and they want the best for their loved ones' educational pathway. We want to leave you with our final thought that sometimes the system of special education can feel overwhelming and it is quite complex, but with the right tools and information, you will manage your child's education just fine. Continue to advocate for your children and remember your voice matters. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. If anyone has any questions, I think we're a small group, so we can probably just turn our mics on. If anyone has any questions.
And thank you, Linda.
And Lorraine, myself, and Mona would be able to answer anything if there was anything that you wanted clarification on. Hi, Carol. Sarah, thank you for the time. Thank you, Sarah. We tried to condense it the best way.
And thank you, Richard, for noting, yes, the next SPEC meeting is actually on Monday, October the 18th. We were trying to figure out the pattern and we believe it's the third Monday. So yes, the agenda is posted for Monday's meeting. And as you saw, all the dates are there going forward. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I was going to mention it's actually usually the first Monday, but because of Thanksgiving, it got moved this particular month for some reason. And also, yes, there's a link on the TDSB website so people can actually attend and see the meeting live if they would like to. Thank
Perfect. You. Thank you.
I don't see any more questions on the chat here. And I'm glad that you found, Sarah, I'm glad that you found the workshop to be beneficial for you. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Enjoy your evening as well. And thank you for
Thank
being
you.
Richard. Appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Linda, you have a wonderful weekend too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.